Back at it on the Red, Gold, and Bold podcast with you, episode 29, as we move into what is officially now the 2022 season. Back with you, as always, Jeff Chadiha from the NFL Network, NFL.com. Eric Eager coming to us from his office this time. Pro Football Focus, the data scientist, the VP of R&D. Check out his great work at pff.com. My name is Soren Petro. You can catch my work at 810whb.com, and much to get to today as the free agent world is moving and moving quickly, maybe not as quickly as some Chiefs fans would like it for the Chiefs. We'll get to the structuring of Frank Clark, his contract. Justin Reid is now a Kansas City Chief. That means that all likely Tyrann Mathieu will not be. What does that mean for Tyrann Mathieu moving forward? Charvarius Ward's a 49er for a pretty big price tag. Wide receivers are signing everywhere but Kansas City. We'll find out if the Chiefs can find a wide receiver in free agency. We'll talk about that tonight. Broncos and Chargers making big moves to close the gap on the Kansas City Chiefs. And Patrick Mahomes, again, a lot of quarterback movement, a lot of guys getting paid. How much pressure is now on Patrick Mahomes to deliver for the Kansas City Chiefs? But let's start with the first one. Frank Clark is a Chief. Jeff Chadiha. Eric and I discussed this a little bit today on the program, on my radio show. And listen, I get it. I get the dollars and cents. I love the idea. Frank Clark is a Chief. Why? But we actually know a big part of the why. But is this still the right move to make, even with the financial situation that the Chiefs find themselves in?
Well, it's the right move in the sense that, as you said, the money makes sense. The depth is an issue here, but it's an issue that's of the Chiefs' own creation. And so I have an issue when you're always trying to make up for problems that you've made for yourself. And the first issue I have with this is that every minute Frank Clark spends playing football with the Kansas City Chiefs is a minute you're not spending developing somebody else to play that position for the Kansas City Chiefs. And so if we're willing to all agree upon the one thing, that he's been a disappointing player the last couple of years, the contract, the trade, even though it got them Super Bowl, has not given them a player who can live up to that contract. I just don't see the value in continuing to go down the road with a player who you know is not going to be able to be helpful to you in the playoffs, in big moments. The pass rush was an issue last year. They were 29th to the NFL in sacks. They've got two players back from that defensive line as far as starters right now, and Chris Jones and Frank Clark. And Chris Jones hasn't had a sack in the playoffs, and Frank Clark hasn't been a good player for 2 years. So I don't know where you're able to get excited about what this defense can be. And I know every year at this time, going into August, September, we're all going to say the Chiefs are going to win the division again. Chargers are going to screw it up somehow. The Broncos are going to screw it up. The Raiders are going to screw it up. But I don't know if you can make those same arguments right now, because what they're putting together on defense right now should not give somebody who cares about the Kansas City Chiefs a lot of confidence.
Yeah, Eric, listen, I think Jeff makes a great point. We are going to hear everybody pick the Chiefs. They're going to go with the statement. And listen, it's not dumb. It's not a bad statement. Until somebody beats the man, I'm going to go with the man, right? Ric Flair, the old, you want to be the man, beat the man adage, I think is a fair way to go about doing things. However, there is a lot of reason to like the Broncos. There's a lot of reason to like the Chargers. They have quarterbacks now. They have cap room and they're using it. I heard your breakdown on the great podcast you do with George Charvarius on Pro Football Focus, the PFF forecast, and you guys and I forget who'd you have on.
Ben Baldwin.
Yeah, Ben Baldwin, and you were talking, and I think you were still putting the Chiefs at 45%. Now some moves have happened since then, but 45% you had them to win the AFC West. I'm curious, does the Frank Clark move help or hurt those percentages?
I don't think it influences them at all. And I think that that's like what the move was, right? Like I agree with Jeff to an extent. At any time Frank Clark's out there, you can't develop somebody else. But let's face facts about this team's ability to develop players. Like, they're not developing Michael Dana. Michael Dana is the same player that he walked into Arrowhead at. Joshua Kando is the same player that he walked into Arrowhead as. Again, my optimism is mostly because I've seen them make some moves over the last few days, right? But also just hint at these that things are going to be different. If this was last year's Chiefs, I'd have the same concerns that Jeff has, which is, they're moving forward with Frank Clark, and they're trying to prove that the Frank Clark move was okay. It's not okay. But I can tell you, like, I think it's mostly, look, it was going to cost $13.5 million to cut him. It's going to cost a little bit more than that to keep him. And it would have cost that much to acquire somebody like a bargain basement veteran player to come in. So if they view it as, look, this was a sunk cost anyway. So our replacement for Frank Clark is Frank Clark. And he is not going to get into the way of playing. Let's say they draft a guy in the first round. He's not going to get in the way of them signing Melvin Ingram. I know you talked about that today on your show. If he's not going to get in the way of them going after Jerry Hughes, Chandler Jones, somebody like that, I'm perfectly fine with it because the money makes sense. The problem is, and what Jeff's alluding to, is that they have hung on to the allure of players that they have highly regarded for a long time. That's the league. And if they still view, if they still think it's like a Dennis Miller joke. Dennis Miller once said, the problem with Barbra Streisand is she thinks she's Barbra Streisand. The problem with Frank Clark is if the Chiefs think he's Frank Clark, right? That's the issue, I think. If they just treat him like a replacement level guy, to me, like it's just a whatever move, to be honest with you. It's just, it's an inconsequential move for their future.
Inconsequential, and I do get what you're saying, and I understand that the math is like this is the cheapest guy you can bring back who maybe has some upside, and you can't put the genie back in the bottle once you've signed him, right? That's everyone's. I play, radio psychiatrist for a number of Chiefs fans that are like, well, what they should have done, and I get it, man. I understand. You can't go back and put that genie back in the bottle. I'm curious because I mentioned this, Derek. I do think there's something to be said for making a statement and saying 2 off-the-field incidents, one right after another, when the first one should have been like, I'm throwing away my career here. I do think if the Chiefs are going down this road, they're of the mindset that either the weapons charges are not going to stick or it's going to be minimal whatever he gets, and or they're like, well, or he gets suspended and it's not going to cost us any cash anyway on that. And so we'll just live with it. I think that's pretty clear that that's what their expectation is on it. I think there's something to be said for, listen, when we give you a bunch of money, we put a big high pick in you, and you don't come close to returning the investment, we're not leaving you sticking around. I mean, I think there is something to be said, or am I wrong? Am I missing that? Is that some hairy high school ass way of looking at things, and treating professional athletes that way is a recipe for failure, Jeff?
Well, look, I think the legal issue is a big thing, and Terry McCulley brought it up first here, and I agree with this. It should be an issue. And I don't know how the Chiefs could be in a position where they can determine it's not going to be that big a deal this coming season, unless they've got some kind of inside information inside the LA District Attorney's office. If they're relying on Frank Clark to tell them the truth, trust me, ask how that went with Kareem Hunt. Like, people can lie to you all the time about the severity of things. And so I think it's very reckless and foolish to hope that's not going to be an issue. If he's missing games, this is even a dumber move. So, but I agree with you. You should start making examples of people who aren't performing at a high level, because we'll go back to the whole thing, the comparisons to the Patriots dynasty and all that stuff. Frank Clark wouldn't be around right now if Bill Belichick was the coach. I'll tell you that right now. He would not be around. The legal issue would be one thing, but just the fact that he hadn't performed at a high enough level, they would have had somebody to put in his place. And to sit here and expect, and I hear what Eric's saying, they're all valid points, but you need a better pass rush. You need somebody to pressure the quarterback. And if he's one of the 4 guys you're most relying upon right now for that, I don't care what you're paying him. He's not worth it.
Yeah. Go ahead, Eric.
I just think that, like, okay, the Chiefs allowing Tyrann Mathieu to go, them allowing Charvarius Ward to go, to me signals a change of the guard. In, like, if this would have happened last year, I would be fully with you that they're going to trot out on the field next year, week 1, and Frank's the right defensive end, and we're all scared that they're just not going to get a pass rush. I would be surprised if Frank Clark started week 1. Like, I literally think that he's a body on this team. That's what I don't think that they're going to try to count on him.
I would be stunned if he is healthy and one of the actives and he didn't start at defensive end. I would be stunned because
Petro, I will let's bet Okay, first play of week 1, 2022, Joe's. I already owe you like 3 Joes, so let's just make it -2. If Frank starts,
don't forget about the Joes you owe my mom.
When I owe everybody Joes, okay? But I like
burn ends before the pregame even started, for God's sake.
Double or nothing, Frank Clark does not start for this team.
So who's starting then?
That's the great thing though, because they took his number down from 28 or whatever it was going to be down to what it was going to be the whole time, which is 14. And now it's either going to be a first round pick, a second round pick. It could be Jerry Hughes. It could be Melvin Ingram. It's going to be somebody other than Frank Clark.
I'm down for that bet. Health. Let's take health out of the side if he's healthy.
If he's injured, then all bets are off. But
which gives us what, a 15% chance that this is actually going to be a bet, because every year he's either hurt or he's not playing well, and they're claiming he's hurt.
Yeah.
So one way or the other, injury is going to make its way into this. I mean, listen, again, I said this a number of times today, and I guess I'll say it again a number of times tonight, but I like Frank Clark, the guy, right? I do. I enjoy the talks that we get with him, and I like the guy. I wish he was a wrecking crew, right? He looks like what I want a DN to look like. He looks like a badass. He's kind of speaks softly, carry a big stick, except for he forgot the stick, and that's an issue. And so I hear what you're saying, but I just don't think this team. I think it's hard. General managers like to be right, and they're going to give themselves, it's true in every sport, first round picks get extra chances. Even somebody else's teams will sign other first round picks because they come with that pedigree, that at one time, a consensus. Many teams thought that they were going to be good. So let's see if we can get it figured out. I think there are 2 things that are giant that I want to underscore here. One, Jeff talking about the fact that, Bill Belichick, he would not be on this team. Right. And the Chiefs have got to become more Patriot-esque. And 2, Eric started this point with nobody gets better. So, Frank Clark played at what level, Eric? Below replacement level player. So I know what you're saying, that to go get him. No, to go get a guy better, it would have cost more. But you could have cut him and signed a league minimum guy and gotten the same thing from what you
see. That's the thing. I think that Frank Clark, limited reps, could be above replacement level. Like if you look at his data, there are certain slivers of his data. You guys, I am the biggest Frank Clark hater. That's half my. I almost made a Twitter account. Did Frank Clark get a pressure? No. Did Zach Ertz break a tackle? No. Did Frank Clark get a pressure? No. I don't think anything of Frank Clark as a player. I do think, though, that the Chiefs, to Jeff's point, have put themselves in this position, and I think it's something of a higher upside way. A higher upside way of being able to use a veteran minimum contract on a player who, for all these Chiefs fans and my mentions on Twitter, he's a great locker room guy, he's a great this, he's a great that, and I'll back up the Belichick thing a little bit, right? Because here's what Belichick does. He sends Kyle Van Noy to the Dolphins, and then he sucks, and Kyle Van Noy comes back, right? He sends Jamie Collins to the Browns. Jamie Collins comes back. There's an element of Frank Clark having to waddle into that locker room and be like, look, I used to be one of the highest paid players on this team, and now this team is basically treating me like a scrub. There's an aspect of that. I agree that ultimately, you might have to go the whole way to show your whole team, hey, look, if you mess around off the field and you're not very good on the field, you're out. But I also think there's a little bit of Frank Clark that's tail between his legs. Because listen, if Frank Clark could get a better than veteran minimum job in the NFL this year, he would not have agreed to this. There is some aspect of, Frank, there is some sort of self-awareness that's going to happen here. And I think also awareness within the locker room that, look, this guy has not performed up to this level. And the Chiefs are essentially giving him a third chance, but it's not they're not paying him. He's already made that money that they would have lost by cutting him. He's making veteran minimum this year, and he probably deserves it.
Well, and I'll say this, and Hound Dog's right. I think you better stop, Eric. I do agree. if people are catching us via the podcast, when we stream live, we've got the chat room that on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube. I don't think on Twitter yet, but on the other three, or excuse me, not on Twitter, on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. You can join us in the chat room and comment. By the way, we'd appreciate your likes, your retweets, all the positive comments and feedback we can get, and of course, tell your friends and everything. But Eric's getting crushed here in the chat room. I mean, one of them is it's a trick, Petro. He'll be suspended. This one, another one from Hound Dog. Frank ain't going through training camp without at least a hammy. Maybe he'll be back by week 1, though. I mean, look, we understand what the expectation is for the fan base here, and it's not high. It's not positive, right? But I'll say this. I mean, I do think that they have to start looking and going, Bill Belichick understands what you've said many times, Eric. It's about not having weaknesses, right? It's about being solid everywhere. And so he would not have poured this kind of chunk of his cap and that much of his draft into one guy, knowing that football players get hurt. Guys disappoint. And you can't put the genie back in the bottle on this, but man, at some point you can move on. And I think this would have been the time. I literally think we're at a point. I've always said, if not him, then who? And I think that's what the Chiefs asked themselves on this. Well, if not Frank Clark, then who? Well, we can get Frank Clark for less than we can get anybody else that we think has an upside. But I think the upside's gone, right? Yeah. I mean, Jeff, do you see an upside?
That's where I'm at. That's where I'm at with it. To me, it's a production issue that, it's a great point about the guys who leave New England and come back, but Bill Belichick knows how to get the best out of those guys. Yeah, I don't think they know how to get the best out of Frank Clark, or we've seen the best he can give you. And that was 3 years ago. Yeah. And so, it's Eric may have a great point here. He may end up being a great part-time pass rusher, but even then you're still overpaying the guy to do that for you. My thing is at some point you have to trust your scouting. You have to trust your draft picks. The people who are there that you brought in, the Josh Kaindos and Mike Danas, why are they there? If they can't be more than what he's given you. If they can't do it, then you really got to look at yourself in the mirror and say, what are we doing as a personnel department?
Yeah, and I think that's the statement, right? It's a statement about Kaindo, and it's a statement about Dana. They still need more. They're so thin on the defensive line, which is a statement about how they balance their cap, which is something we've talked about many times. And I get what Mark says. I'm and he's with Eric. He said, I'm not sure who you get for $1.2 million to fill the hole he leaves. And I think, Mark, the point that Jeff and I are making is what hole? Right? Like, it's not giving you anything. Right. So there's no hole to leave. So I understand the concept of Frank Clark, the idea, the dream of Frank Clark. No, I don't see the guy that for $1.2 million is going to come in and replace him. But I think we're kidding ourselves when we think that you're really losing anything. I literally
Petro, right when you said that I was getting drilled in the comments section, a bunch of people came out of the woodwork. Aaron called me a gymnast. Ryan said I agree with Eric. Mark, I flat out agree with Eric. I mean, you didn't post those while I was trying to talk.
That's what I was just saying. I said Mark, who
they were coming on too quickly.
Right. And I was just making a point.
I think we're all in agreement on the basic tenets of this thing, right? Which is, and I guess the real place where our disagreements start is our trust in the Kansas City Chiefs' ability to handle this situation properly, right? Petro thinks that they're going to start Frank Clark at $1.2 million week 1. Jeff agrees with him probably. Yeah. And I think that they're like, what the hell? Let's just have him on the roster. But I do not believe that they are planning to have Frank Clark be a linchpin in this defense. I literally think that they are playing $1.2 million for a backup defensive end who has a locker room presence, who what are they like? They're not getting better at $1.2 million than Frank Clark. If they play Frank Clark part-time, that's my guess.
Two things. Number one, locker room presence. We haven't seen the locker room presence when he's relegated to being a backup, right? So how do you think that's going to go? And first of all, I don't think you can lead from the bench. I don't think in any professional sport. I've watched teams, sign old guys. Well, we got him in here for some leadership. And the young guys who can hit better if it's baseball, shoot better if it's basketball, they all laugh at the old guy who tries to tell them how to do it. Like, yeah, Pops, I didn't see you doing nothing tonight. That is the locker room mentality, whether you like it or not. That's how it is. You're frozen in high school, and nothing changes. And if you can't ball, don't tell me shit, because I ain't listening, right? Like that's what it comes down to. So like the leadership aspect of it is non-existent when he goes to the bench. And secondly, I don't think anybody's going to follow him. You know, and I'm not convinced that his attitude's going to be any good. So like that's why I'm like, I think you're inviting a potential cancer into the
But
line.
then what's the risk if all those things go wrong, they can cut him, and they're in this exact same position that they were in if they would have cut him now, right? I believe so.
Well, I think being in this position, if you cut him, allows you to be more honest with yourself about how you evaluate people going forward and look for people who might be able to help you.
Right.
Now they're in the position where they say, "Hey, we got Frank Clark back. He's the best we can do."
Yeah, and I think that's where I reserve. It's where I agree with you, Jeff. Like if the Chiefs were continuing to operate in the way that they were operating post like Super Bowl, then I think what you're saying is extremely rational and it's reasonable. I think that the Chiefs are moving on from that. I think the moving on from Mathieu, moving on from Ward is a signal that the Chiefs are going to go into this Patrick Mahomes contract with a more mature application of resources. Now, I could be wrong, and they could go out there and like give Orlando Brown a big ass deal and all this kind of stuff and like really, but I'm reserving judgment given we've seen evidence that they're willing to be smarter about these things than they have been in the past.
Listen, what's the best case scenario? Like, I think if you play this out, the best case scenario is he has 15 sacks, right? Like he emerges. And then you go, where was this for the last 3 years?
Yeah.
Like salary drives you can play otherwise. Cause like, what are you going to do if he has 15 sacks? Are you going to trade him? No, there's no trade value, right?
Yeah.
At going on 30 years old, off the field issues, only plays in a contract year. Who would trade you anything of note for the guy? Right? Like I just don't see the upside.
But then you'll get a comp pick out of him that you were never going to freaking get before.
Yeah. But the bigger issue in this, I know we got one other topics.
Right.
This is the byproduct of Joe Thuney getting $80 million. This is how you operate with the idea of like every move that's going to keep us in contention for a championship has to be made. And so they would have more options here if they weren't so reckless in other areas. And so it's not just all Frank Clark's fault, but they've got to reel in this idea of, let's go get this guy because we're one move away. And this big name person is just, you keep doing that enough, eventually you run out of runway.
Yeah, there's no doubt. We're going to see how it plays out. We'll see where they go from here, and we'll see what else they get done along the defensive line. They got a safety done. Justin Reid is brought in 3 years, $31.5 million. Spelling the end of Tyrann Mathieu's stay in Kansas City. Jeff, let's start with you. You okay with this, with the trade out, contracts, expectations? I mean, certainly we're going to see what Tyrann Mathieu ends up getting when it's all said and done. And I can paint you a scenario that if they had more productivity on the roster at safety, they could have just been patient, waited it out and seen, but they obviously gave a take it or leave it offer. Mathieu wasn't taking it. They're going in another direction.
Yeah, well, Aaron asked the question if they moved on from Mathieu. So yeah, that's a definite yes. And it's funny because I think we reported on our air that they didn't even offer him a deal. And so I don't know if that's legit. Have you heard that? Seen that?
I have heard that. I've seen it in a couple of places that Tyrann Mathieu was not offered a deal. Now, they've had discussions. They talked about having discussions last offseason. Now, maybe they never came back around to actually putting dollar figures on the table. But and I don't know about anybody else. I'm okay with that. Like, we can push Charvarius Ward onto this conversation as well. I think smart football teams get to a point that a year in advance, the guys they want to keep, they're looking to extend, and they either extend them or they trade them, and you get resources back for them. And, they were still in on the bidding on Charvarius Ward. Eric said that today. Eric, if I'm not mistaken, you thought the Chiefs were all the way up to around $12 million per on Charvarius Ward. He ends up going for $13 million per for the 49ers. Like, I'm okay. Like, you tried to get it done. He played it out. There's comp picks that are going to come with Tyrann Mathieu. There you have a dollar figure. You give the guy a pat on the back and say, hey, job well done here. We wish you all the best.
Yeah. Look, I think it's a good move. They got younger at the position. He had taken a step back in his productivity. He wasn't the same player he was when he first got here, or the first 2 years he was here. He was an all-pro safety. They lose a lot of leadership. I think that's clear. He was the MVP for a reason, even with all the antics on Twitter and all that stuff. he's a big reason why this defense was able to be championship caliber during his time here. The versatility he brought to the defense was a big factor in that defense playing the way it did. I do not think Justin Reid can do some of the things that Tyrann Mathieu did at his best. I don't see him being the kind of cover guy who can go in the slot and take on receivers and give you the opportunity to move him around and confuse quarterbacks with coverage. So that will be different for them. And so we'll see how that stacks up. But certainly Justin Reid's a more physical player. He's more athletic. He's younger. And I'm glad they made the move faster, made sooner than later. You're right about that part of it, because to sit around and wait, see what's going to happen. I'm kind of curious to see what kind of market Tyrann Mathieu has out there now, because I thought the Ravens made a lot of sense, and they went out and spent a whole bunch of money on Marcus Williams from the Saints. And so I do think his value will be closer to what Justin Reid got on a team that's going to be contending than it would have been what Marcus Williams got in Baltimore.
We said this on your show, Petro. Reid's most expensive year is the same as what Marcus Williams' APY is over 5 years, right? So this deal is, not necessarily team friendly, but I think it's the kind of move that the Kansas City Chiefs need to be making now. Mathieu probably earned, this is the thing. This is the hard thing about the world, that the Chiefs are in. Charvarius Ward probably earned $14 million a year. Probably did. And he's a great story. That doesn't mean you have to be the team to pay him that much. And Tyrann Mathieu is probably the best free agent signing that the franchise has ever had. And I think it shows great restraint, and I think it shows good understanding of what's happening to move on and to let him go. And you look at Justin Reid, to Jeff's point, talk about a 2.5 sigma athlete, right? So you look 93rd percentile in 40-yard dash, 95th percentile in 3 cones, 72nd percentile in 20-yard shuttle, 87th percentile in broad jump. You're talking about a very good athlete. You're also talking about buying low on a player because, early, Houston used to be a team that was winning the AFC South. And they weren't perfect, but they had the 24-0 lead on the Chiefs in the divisional round just 3 years ago. Justin Reid was a starter on that game. Now, he got absolutely abused by Travis Kelce in that game, by the way, over and over and over again. But he was like a 1/3 win above replacement player, which is right around where Tyrann Mathieu was. The last 2 seasons, he's been injured, but he's declined. His performance didn't do as well. And I think the Chiefs, and I asked, somebody within the front office, I'm like, this is you by basically buying the fact that Houston doesn't have a clue. And they kind of winked, it was one of those yeah, this is where we're buying low on the player because, he's a great athlete, showed he could play at the NFL level, and then struggled when the team around him sucked. And to me, that's I think where you can go. Yes, Brian, he had one of the lower grades the last 2 years. That's a 100% fact. Now, his first 2 seasons, he was a very good player. So the Chiefs are buying low on him. And that's why you can get him at 10 million APY, where you would have to have paid Tyrann Mathieu, a much older player, but a better player, more accomplished player, but you'd have to pay him 15. So that's where I think the Chiefs are making a good move here, even though, yes, the last 2 years have not been great. But I'll buy a little bit of that being Houston's culture, Houston's scheme, Houston just being a football, being a football team that can't really do much.
Yeah, I'm not convinced Tyrann Mathieu is going to get that number, right? But I do think it's a great point. I mean, because I was scouring through the grades and I'm like, ooh, what is this? Obviously, the Chiefs think, the coaching the last couple of years has gone downhill with Houston, and they think they can coach him better. But isn't that a fool's errand, Eric? I mean, isn't this what you're talking about? Why do you think they're buying low, but aren't you the one that's been saying they don't make anybody better? So if he's bad coming in, isn't he going to be bad here?
It's not even that. I think he's better than what he showed at Houston, right? He's played that well before. I think that's the difference. But yeah, I don't necessarily know if he's going to get better, but if his performance from 2018, 2019 is what they get for the Chiefs, I think it's worth the number that he's going to get, right? That's kind of my take on the whole thing. I mean, if I have to do the quick back of the napkin calculation, but if you're worth 0.3 of a win per year, it's about 45 million per war. That's about 13.5 million. So if he plays up to his rookie and sophomore year levels of play, they're getting surplus value with that contract, right? And, versus like Matthew's about, 0.35, that's, 15 point, so it's a little bit less surplus value for buying Matthew at 14. So it's, again, I think that they're making a good move here. And I agree that like it could crash and burn because if his play in Houston, like if Houston's bad because of him, then that's a different story. I think he was bad because of Houston. And again, that's my worldview here on that one. And again, like I said, I think they're getting a good deal on a good athlete with some potential.
Yeah.
Well, and go ahead, Soren.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to say, the bigger question, and you can follow up on this, is he the kind of player who can compensate for the Chiefs' deficiencies at cornerback? Because Tyrann Mathieu at his best was able to make those corners look better. Just because, again, of his ability to move around, his ability to be a chess piece in that defense. If you have a safety who's a lot more traditional or conventional, then your corners become a lot more vulnerable. And so that's the big question I have is can he make those guys better? Because if he can't, then you got a whole other set of problems going on with you that a pass rush, a mediocre pass rush, can contribute to.
Yeah. Speaking of corners, Charvarius Ward is moving on. Jeff, I know you're surprised at the number that he got from the 49ers, right?
You know what? I'll say he went to the right place to get that number.
Yeah.
He's not what I've always said about Charvarius Ward, and I think people here may think I'm hating on the guy. He's not a great cover guy. He's not a great man-to-man lockdown. And so when he was going against Devontae Adams, for example, without Aaron Rodgers throwing the football, he was making some plays, but you're not putting him out there against, Jamar Chase or, Stephon Diggs, any of these guys who are big time, Justin Jefferson. What's that?
Out there, you're just watching Jamar Chase put up records.
Put up huge numbers against him. And so, yeah, I think playing in a more zone-heavy scheme, he's a long corner, he's physical. He fits perfectly with what they want to do in San Francisco. So I understand the money there. And you're right. If the Chiefs had tried to pay him that kind of money here, I would have been shaking. We would have been talking about this all night long. I would have been totally against it.
Yeah, I think Ward had a better year in 2021 than I think our perception. Like some of the contested catch numbers, right, which are pretty noisy. Like he had fairly good coverage on even the plays that he was beaten on. But I agree with you. Like my intuition, and I said this on Soren's show, is he was going to go somewhere like the Jets or somebody where they were going to, want him to be Trumaine Johnson, right? And he was going to be Trumaine Johnson. And then he was going to come back to the Chiefs a year or two later. Like Bashad Breeland went to Minnesota and, they had him singled up on players. And it's just like, what are you doing? Like, this is not – but I think San Francisco, that sort of cover three, tree – I think that's a perfect place for him. And I think he tackles well. I don't think he's for the most part, he was terrible on the screen against the Bengals in the AFC Championship game. But I think for the most part, he's physical. He plays hard. I think he's a good fit there. And so I'd be surprised if he came back to Kansas City within a couple of years, which was my favorite after the initial one. But it was interesting. I think the Chiefs very much viewed him, and actually, I was hearing his agent was the same way. They very much viewed him as a good Chief, right? Which is a sort of a backhanded compliment to say, we made you a decent looking corner. Yeah. And, if you're going to go somewhere, good luck. And, I think to his credit, he went somewhere where he might actually be okay.
Yeah, I think as long as the 49ers continue to have cap room and continue to make sure that they've got a salty defensive line, then I think, had you been able to put some pressure on Joe Burrow, then maybe Joe Burrow's not dropping perfect dimes. Even on the hand. I mean, I'll never forget Charvarius Ward getting his hand on one ball that then rolled over his hand and into the hands of Jamar Chase. But I mean, if you knock the quarterback around a little bit, Charvarius Ward's going to look better, right? I mean, topic one. Had Frank Clark kicked somebody's ass along the way, maybe Charvarius Ward is getting paid, and maybe Charvarius Ward, maybe even Jeff Chadiha is saying Charvarius Ward fits in a Chiefs uniform. I think this was kind of no man's land, and I will say this. I respect that the Chiefs bowed out. If your information's correct, Eric, and they were in it to 12, they had a number and they walked, right? And they said, okay, this is it. This is as far as we're going to go, because I think there are some teams that get caught up. And I think the Niners, this may catch them at some point, in the next couple of years on Trent Williams' deal. I think they were in a bidding war with the Chiefs and they were just like, whatever it takes, we're going to get him. And I think that's a dangerous spot to be in. And I'll give the Chiefs credit. They clearly wanted him, but they said, okay, too much is too much. And I think they need to do more of that. If they do more of that, they'll be a better team moving forward.
Don't you think? I mean, don't you think the last two moves that we're talking about was very much the Chiefs doing this? Like they weren't going to get up to 12 on Justin Reid. You know, the Justin Reid deal is very good for the Chiefs, and like as far as the way safety position is, how oscillatory it is, buying low, buying at $4 million, $5 million, $6 million if you count Jamal Adams, $7 million underneath the market level. And walking on a guy that was walking on two players who they have very good memories with. I mean, Charvarius Ward started 4 AFC Championship games, 2 Super Bowls, and has a Super Bowl ring. Like that's he's not Ring of Honor or anything, but he's a player with whom the Chiefs have a lot of memories, and they let him go. And that, to me, that's the thing that we've been complaining about this team for 2 years.
Yes, that they any good guy was kept because there wasn't.
It's easy to get rid of Reggie Ragland. It's easy to get rid of. I mean, Kendall Fuller was one that actually, but even Kendall Fuller had declined so badly in year 2. That one was easy. It's harder when it's your MVP.
Yeah, I agree, and I will give them credit. Good football teams are watching former players play for other teams, right? Because they had an abundance of talent. They've got somebody to step in. But do they have somebody to step in right now, Jeff? Who plays corner for Charvarius Ward? Because we can be like, well, they get somebody in the draft, and all of a sudden, you're counting on 5 guys to come in and replace other guys in the draft. Who's the guy that steps in for Charvarius Ward?
Right now, it's Rashad Fenton, right? He's the next man up. We'll see if he can handle that. I think he was better the way he's built. He's looked like he's better in the slot. But he's been around he's going his 4th year now, right? He's coming to last year of his deal. So he's the guys that have come in and step up and do what Charvarius Ward has done for them. Again, this goes back to some of the moves they've made in the past. It's like they haven't really built up a deep roster of cornerbacks you can trust. And so, they're going to have to go out and find some guys in the draft. They're going to have to find some guys in free agency and guys for cheap. They're going to have to find another Charvarius Ward, to be honest with you. Be combing the waiver wire in training camp to see who's getting let go, because right now it's like this defense. It worries me because talking about the defensive line, talking about the versatility of Mathieu being gone now, and now we're talking about the lack of depth at cornerback. There's a lot of things to wonder about, and so Fenn's the guy, but I'm not super confident in him at all.
I love the idea of no weak links at the secondary. I bought into that. Eric has preached that for a while. I think that's a great point. But one thing I won't buy into is that you can just find corners off the scrap heap, which I know they won a Super Bowl doing that with Bashaud Breeland and Charvarius Ward, kind of off the scrap heap.
Morris Claiborne. I mean, like they kind of do it. They do it differently though, right? Like,
but I think that they made it work, but it's not the plan and should not be considered the plan moving forward. And I think to Jeff's point, we keep talking about the D-line and you're like, well, who's going to start at D-end? You're telling me it's going to be a guy they draft. How many freaking guys do they have to spend draft picks on the defensive line before one of them sticks? Because you know what happens? All of a sudden you look down and before they signed Reid, there was one defensive back under contract for 23, and it's L'Jarius Sneed. And I don't care what anybody says, that's a train wreck. Like, that's not your plan. You end up there. And I give them great credit for piecing that secondary together, but at some point they need to invest in a corner, don't they?
But I think that the gamble, and this is a place where I've had to take a step back and look at my worldview on this. Like, it's hard to put all your eggs. Like when you say invest in corner, I think they look at you and they say we are, right? Because to me, like I look at the JC Jackson. We talked about this on your show today. Like, I don't think there's a way in hell that J.C. Jackson plays up to that deal. I think cornerback play is so contextual, it's so scheme dependent that you're almost always buying too high when you go with the Tremaine Johnsons, the Janoris Jenkins, those guys. When you pick up those guys in free agency, you're almost always buying at the top. And the Chiefs have sort of said the other thing, which is, I think it's different than being like, we're going to invest crappy capital at the position. Under Spagnuolo, they have thrown numbers at the position, and they have, in my opinion, been pretty pragmatic about who plays, right? So this past season, they said, we're going to throw a little bit at Mike Hughes, a former first-round pick. We're going to throw a little bit at DeAndre Baker, a former first-round pick. And then we have the guys that were around the whole time, which was undrafted Charvarius Ward, 6th-round pick Rashad Fenton, 4th-round pick L'Jarius Sneed, and then, and ultimately the 3 guys that ended up playing were not the 3 guys that they had in order at the beginning of the year. And I think that's kind of how, now again, none of those guys are great. And if you get into a game, if you're matched up against great individual talent at the wide receiver position, like they were twice against Cincinnati, that's where they can get got. But for a team that's strapped cap-wise as much as they are, would you rather have that than $15 million spent on a corner like Trey Waynes, who might suck?
No,
like,
that's
kind of where I am.
I'm not advocating overspend on guys that aren't that good. I am advocating putting your hands up and saying, you know what, guys, we might not be the favorite in the AFC this year. And God forbid we might even have to go 9-8 like the Baltimore Ravens and not make the playoffs. But we're going to set the cap right. Like you're talking about this, like they don't have enough draft picks to draft all the things they need anymore, right? Because they've been going for it, which is commendable, right? Especially when you hadn't won a championship in 50 years, right? But at some point, I hate saying it again, but shift freaking gears, right? Like shift gears. Like you have the trophy. No one's going to say you can't win the big one. You've got it. It's right there. Tap the ring. Anytime anyone wants to talk some smack your way and start shifting gears, because this is what we're finding is, and I guarantee you what you just said, Eric, with no cap room and you want to overspend, that's what they're saying in that room, in those rooms there at Arrowhead. And they're talking about like, well, in the situation we're in, they need a fundamental shift to change the situation.
Oh, for sure.
Right. And so I just want to be clear on that. And I know you agree and I know you know it. And I know that's something that Jeff has been talking about for a long time. But like all the picks on D linemen have left corner bare. Right. Yeah. And no, I'm not proposing whoever the best go overspend for JC Jackson. I'm not. But at some point, draft a couple of guys. Right. Like you've said a number of times, you don't find quality edge rushers generally at the end of the first round. Right. They're TJ Watts. They're diamonds in the rough. Right. Jared Allen was a 4th. There are guys that can be found. But, a can't miss guy isn't going to be there. But you find top shelf corners there. You find them there all the time. But you have to actually draft one, right?
They have not taken a corner in the first 3 rounds since Marcus. Steven Nelson, too. Like, that was the last, and by the way, Steven Nelson would be a pretty good Chief. I know they actually don't like him in the building. That's Steven Nelson's the kind of guy the Chiefs should sign, right? Like, that's what you're talking about, right? You're talking about get players in the room that have some pedigree, right? It might not be the top end guys, but if you throw $1 year, $7 million at Patrick Peterson, right? And then you are okay if he gets beaten out by somebody better. But at least you're gonna put some talent into the room and some experience into the room. I think that's what you're advocating for, and I'm all for that. I just worry, they are bargain. They've never spent more than $4 million at the position under Spags, and that's what I think you're trying to shove that number out maybe twice as big.
Well, they've operated with the mindset that they will always be able to rush the passer and get after the quarterback. And the problem here is that when you aren't doing that, you still have to play defense. You still have to find some way to deal with people. And if you're not going to be able to do that consistently, which my hope is here as they get into the draft and deeper into, I don't think you have to go out and spend crazy money on cornerback, but Trayvon Diggs, Xavier Howard, J.C. Jackson, all these guys were not first-round picks. And guess what? They've all played at a pretty high level for you. The problem I've had is the Chiefs have acted like, well, we don't have to go spend that kind of money or that kind of draft capital in these players because it's all about what happens up front. Well, you're not that strong there anymore. And so you got to find some way to deal with that aspect of this, which, again, is why the Franco situation is so frustrating to me.
Right. Jeff, I want to put this one to you because Terry makes a great point, and I agree with his point initially. History shows the Chiefs will fill most needs before the draft. I doubt they'll go into the draft having to pick or reach on a position. History tells us that, right? But those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it, and they're not studying the history of what's happened. They're doing things in a different way, and they don't have the resources to be looking like that. I think they're going to go into this draft needing a corner because I get that Rashad Fenton steps up and you bump all these guys up, but you just got worse at each one.
Yeah.
Right, because they were all pushed down. So now you just got a little bit worse at each one of those positions, which collectively is going to have an effect. And you don't need one DN like Frank Clark, Michael Dana, Josh Kando are not.
They need 2 defensive ends with a clue that are not on the team right now.
As it stands right now. Now maybe they're going to bring back Derek Nottie, and that's going to help fill one of the roles. But they don't have anybody to go next to Chris Jones. It's Tershawn Wharton, and that's it. Yeah. Right? It's some guys from practice squads. So, I mean, I think this is a time, like, will they find some guys? Yes. And at what cost? Can they do it? Listen, I can show you the way that they can save $22 million rolling back Patrick Mahomes' deal. I think they're going to do it. You can save $9 million more rolling back Chris Jones, giving him a cap hit next year of $36 million. But you can do it, right? Like, again, it's going to get super expensive next year, where the cap isn't going up as fast as people thought. And they have dozens of holes for next year, even more for next year. So this is like, at some point they might just have to go, you know what? We're going to have to play with an undrafted free agent somewhere, right? Like that's the thing that's going to happen at some point, right, Jeff?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what's going to have to happen is they're going to have to get to the place where they say, you know what, somebody is going to have to, some of these positions, we're going to have to just trust and be patient, as you just said. You know, they're not going to do it on offense, obviously. Not going to do it at left tackle. Not going to do it at receiver. There's always Mahomes wants a veteran receiver, supposedly, so they got to go out and find one of those. But yeah, at some point you have to say, let's bring in people who we trust, who we've drafted, who we believe in, and we're going to give them time to develop and become better players. And I think that is, it's hard to do. And it's, look, I've known Andy Reid a long time. I've gotten to know Veach since he's become the general manager. The biggest fear I had with Andy as he began to have success here is the same thing that affected him in Philadelphia. Once he got to the place where he knew, I got this town by the gonads, they love what I've done to this team. I've got a whole bunch of security and equity built up here. Doesn't matter what I do. Doesn't matter how we operate. I'll find a way to make it work. The fans will trust us. Be faithful. Chiefs Kingdom, we got it figured out. We're going to get it done here. All that good talk. But at the end of the day, you start making these. He made these kinds of moves in Philadelphia. He started to make them now. And it's the kind of moves that it's great. Hey, when Clyde Edwards-Helaire shows up after the Super Bowl, it's like, hey, you know, the offense is going to be phenomenal. But you pay a price for that. When you're paying Joe Thuney $80 million, got to get the offensive line fixed. But you pay a price for this. The price that they're paying for is what we're talking about right now. They've run out of real estate. And at some point, when you're running out of real estate in the NFL, you have 2 options. Be honest with yourself about it and make some hard choices, or keep going down that same path and wind up like Pete Carroll is in Seattle right now.
Yeah. Or watch Andy Reid walk away, leaving you $72 million over the cap.
Yeah, the same.
In New Orleans, right? And now to your point, you just mentioned Mahomes once, a veteran receiver. Eric, you want to explain to me the receiver market? Now, I feel quite validated in my Christian Kirk, my want of Christian Kirk based upon the deal he's got. It does seem to be the incredibly shrinking deal, is because every time I read more details about it, it gets smaller. It's not quite the 4 for $84 million that it was originally reported that's out there, but it's still a really good deal. And maybe there is a loser's tax for the Jaguars to get somebody to go play there.
I think you're getting there, Petro. If I ever wanted validation for my opinions, I look to the Jaguars.
Well, somebody gave him a lot of money. I'll say that.
Yeah.
But then meanwhile, DJ Chark gets a 1-year deal, and it's from the Lions.
Well, that's the thing. I heard from my source that was essentially like the whole, everybody was negotiating wide receivers, boom, 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 and then the Christian Kirk signing happened, and everybody stopped, right? Including Tyreek, including Devontae Adams, including Marquez Valdez-Scantling, including it's weird, man. Like, Marquez Valdez-Scantling's probably going to get more money than Allen Robinson, Odell, Juju, and Jarvis Landry, all guys who are much more accomplished than him, and some guys who are south of 30 still. And so it's just a weird market, right? It's a very weird market. I think the Chiefs will get a good receiver, and I think they'll get him for relatively inexpensive and in a short-term deal. My hope is that it's Allen Robinson, or I talked about Odell today. I kind of want that person to be healthy right away. But
why are you talking about Allen Robinson?
Well, Allen Robinson's healthy right now.
Well, give it 10 minutes.
Yeah, but I mean, you're talking about 1,100-yard receiver 2 years in a row prior to this. Like, he had bad, and look, he was. If you looked at Matt Harmon, who does reception perception, he does a really good job of like looking at success rates versus man coverage and all that. And like Robinson declined just slightly last year, but like the offense was so bad that his production. But he was getting open last year. It just was the offense was so bad. Like 60% of his routes or something were curls or slants. So it was just like the Chicago Bears offense was just a joke last year. Now the guy that ran it is now in Kansas City, but I think Robinson's probably a buy low and could be a pretty good player for this team. He's not the field stretcher that I want. I mean, the player I want is, like you said, Kirk or Valdez-Scantling, but I think those players are going to get pretty big deals. I think Marquez Valdez-Scantling is like this year's Bernard Berrien, like somebody who's just a deep threat that some team falls in love with and pays a lot of money to.
Will Fuller.
Will Fuller, right?
That's who he is.
Well, is Will Fuller the answer in Kansas City? Obviously, he's a free agent still, right? He hasn't signed, has he?
Yeah, no, he is a free agent. Yeah, he hasn't signed yet, but injury problems there as well, as we all know. But the thing about that receiver spot that makes it so hard for the Chiefs to fill, and I try to tell people this all the time, is like you're asking somebody who thinks they're at worst a low number one, to be not even a 2, but be a 3. The 2 here is Travis Kelce. It's whoever's coming in here is knowing that they're going to get maybe at best 40, 50 catches a year. Maybe at best 600 to 800 yards. Maybe at best 6, 7 touchdowns. And knowing, are the Chiefs really going to pay top dollar for that now? The Sammy Watkins deal is come and gone. Like that those days are over. And so if you're somebody who's like Allen Robinson or Juju Smith-Schuster, you're not going to settle for that. Odell Beckham ain't coming here. Like, obviously he's hurt anyway, but he wants to be in LA. Jarvis Landry, of all these guys, makes the most sense. Like, he's the one who he got banged up. He's finally going over the middle. He's a team player. He's not a 1. He's the guy who makes the most sense. But I think Allen Robinson's pie in the sky type talk. I think Valdez-Scantling is like Eric said, he's going to get a big payday and he's going to try to cash in. These guys want money first. For all the idealism we have here about the Chiefs and winning and championships, all that stuff, every guy who's out there in the market right now is thinking one thing: show me the money first, and then we'll talk about rings.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting. I think they will get a receiver. I think they have to get a receiver. Which one they get is going to be interesting. By the way, nice to know that local legend Sam McDowell.
I was just gonna say, what's more surprising, that Sam is commenting on our show, or that somebody is cultured and as Sam has Facebook.
Yeah, exactly. That's Sam, cutting edge technology. That's Sam McDowell. There's no doubt about it. Let's shift gears. How much fear should Chiefs fans have about the progress that the Denver Broncos and the Los Angeles Chargers have made, Jeff? Like, how much of the gap has been closed?
Oh, it's been immense. I mean, I would say right now there's a lot of offseason left. Let's not declare anybody the offseason champion until the offseason is over. But if you put on paper what the Chargers have right now, what the Broncos have, they're better than the Chiefs.
Here's a question, Jeff, though. I've been looking at the betting markets, and the betting markets prefer the Broncos to the Chargers in relatively highly. So for the AFC West, it's like Chiefs are plus 145, Broncos are like plus 190, and the Chargers are plus 275. People think that the Chargers have, pretty like a sizable disadvantage to the Broncos. I don't see that at all.
But isn't that just a product of the Chargers? Like the Chargers have failed. Like, the key piece is Herbert, and he's been there for 2 years, and they haven't made the playoffs. He's been there for 2 years, and they haven't gotten past the Chiefs. Where Russell Wilson's coming to town, he hasn't failed yet. Isn't that more just a perception where it is right now than a reality of the pieces being better in one place or the other?
I think so, but the Broncos have a rookie head coach.
Which I think is a good thing. Like, rookie head coaches win the coach of the year all the time because they exceed the expectations that are put out there. And as we said, the expectations for the Broncos, if he's going to exceed, Nathaniel Hackett's going to exceed those expectations. He'll be division champ because the expectation right now is that he'll be second. So he will win this division if he's going to exceed expectations. And guys mind their P's and Q's and are on the ball in the first year under a head coach. You really measure a coach in years 2 and 3.
I just don't
see Matt Nagy.
Yeah, I guess my question is, and I think maybe it's a good thought because I have my opinion, but like the market must really believe that the Seattle Seahawks were screwing over Russell Wilson because Wilson's production was not commensurate, I think, in the last year and a half. And I know he had the injury, but even before then, like Russell Wilson's an amazing quarterback, probably a Hall of Fame quarterback, but the production was not necessarily commensurate with that reputation in Seattle. And the question is like, will Denver open it up enough to see the best of him? That to me is the only way that you can handicap them as a better team than the Chargers right now.
Well, they don't have to, do they? They don't have to open it up, given they're giving him everything that he had when he was at his best in Seattle, which is a strong run game, a good offensive line, and a good defense. And so I think it's more you're allowing him to play more within his comfort zone, and you get some of the stuff he wanted to do in Denver. I mean, in Seattle with the wideouts they have. I don't think he has to be something more than what he's been. I think he's going to be pretty good in Denver.
I think he'll be good. I just wonder, like, to win the AFC West, the quarterback that wins the AFC West is going to be a first-team All-Pro.
I think that's fair. I will say this to your point about the last year and a half play of Russell Wilson. I mean, he was barreling towards the MVP just before the timeline you set. Like you've cherry-picked a good line. He was the MVP, and then Pete Carroll reached over and jerked the wheel and said, I want to run the ball more.
Yeah.
Right. So, now, is it as definitive that it's all Pete Carroll's fault as maybe the public perception is? No. Like, Russell Wilson has contributed to that, right? Like, he was there, and, you can audible. There are different things you can do, but I do think that they're not bringing in Nathaniel Hackett, and they're not giving up all this for Russell Wilson to watch him hand off 35 times a game. Like, there's no way. There's no way that's happening. So if he can play, he's going to get the opportunity to prove it. Do you agree with that, Eric?
Yeah, I think so. I think that I think they're going to let Russ cook for sure. And I do agree with you. That's why I set the timeline, because essentially that team lost 3 games. That when they let Russ cook, they went 6-3. And Pete Carroll hit the panic button when he threw the interception to Isaiah Simmons against the Cardinals. They hit the panic button, and they lost only 1 game the rest of the year. And that was all the validation that dude needed to run the same nonsense that they had run for the previous all those years. There is a part of me that there are some aspects of Russell Wilson's game that are counterproductive. How much he takes sacks, how long he holds onto the ball, kind of stuff like that, where I think people who are betting Denver, and look, like my 2 bets, I bet the Chiefs and I bet the Chargers in this division. I am fading the Broncos because I think that people are overvaluing the Broncos. I think the bet people are making on the Broncos this year is you're going to get all the good with Wilson, and you're not going to get any of the bad. And I think as much as I believe he's a Hall of Famer and he's one of the best quarterbacks to play during this era, I think that there are negatives to his game that keep him a tier below Herbert and Mahomes. And I think that like I said, the team that wins the division this year is going to have the first team All-Pro quarterback.
Yeah, I'll say this. He will take some big negative plays, right, trying to keep it alive. But that's for teams that can actually get to the quarterback. So the Chiefs don't have to worry about that because as of right now, they can't.
Frank Clark is Mr. 4.5 second sack, though. So, I mean, he'll eat against Denver.
Tano Passanio is Mr. 8 second sack, if you recall.
Breland Speaks was a 12-second sack guy.
Yeah. Let's finish with this, because I thought Jeff made a great point when we got things started, that everybody, he said, come, I can't remember what month you said, if it was July or whatever, everyone's going to say, hey, it's the Chiefs, right? Like it's the Chiefs, because that's easy. Nobody wants to walk out on that plank. Andy Reid sucks. He can't win till he wins. And then Andy Reid's the best. He can't lose. He's the most innovative offensive mind ever, right? That's just how it is. Whatever our most recent, at least on a national scale, what we usually hear is whatever the most recent returns are is official. That's what it is. So until somebody beats the Chiefs, we're going to hear Chiefs, Chiefs, Chiefs. Does anybody here on this podcast want to say Kansas City Chiefs are not winning the AFC West this year? Jeff, you sounded like you were going
I'll
down that
say it.
road.
I'm not winning it. Yeah.
Yeah, that which is absolutely as expected as Frank Clark starting.
That's right. On brand. Yeah.
By the way,
Let's just put it this way.
I don't know who's going to win it, but I'm not picking the Chiefs right now.
Well, Jeff's right. I mean,
That's in August.
Mathematical bet, right, Eric?
If you look at the betting markets, the Chiefs, it's the first time since Mahomes was the starting quarterback the Chiefs haven't been favored against the field in the offseason. And it's also the first time that they're not Super Bowl favorites. The Buffalo Bills are the Super Bowl favorites right now. So, like, I think Jeff's being completely reasonable. I think the harder question is who's going to win it if they don't. And to me, I'll still put my money on the Chiefs. But I did bet when the Chargers were 4-1, I bet them to win the division. Now they're less than 3-1. You know, that's how you make money betting, right? Like you bet good numbers. You know, I'm going to take the Chiefs as long as the Chiefs are sitting at 140 or better, I'm going to continue to take them because it was the same thing last year. In the middle of the season, they were underdogs to win their own division and things fell into place for them. It's going to be harder though. I think that they look at the rest of the division with a healthy dose of respect right now. And I also think that that's why they've gotten their acting gear this year. Like I think they've had a good offseason so far.
Yeah. I don't know who to put my money on, but I just feel like that the fourth place schedule is the Broncos, right?
Yeah.
Third place schedule is the Chargers. You know, those are good spots to be in. I mean, we'll have to see. Teams always play up and play down, and you know, you can't just take the fourth place schedule and say it's going to be the easiest. It generally isn't, right? It generally doesn't work that way. In reality, the first place schedule usually ends up being softer than it's supposed to be. That's one of the things that
because you get to play the last place teams, and all the teams in your division have to play you.
Well, but even softer than what the expectations are, knowing that going in, because
regression.
You line up against first place teams that regress down. The scary part is the second and third place teams because those have teams that are oftentimes on the rise. But yeah, I think this is a time to that the odds makers have it right that the Chiefs are not favored against the rest of the division. Who it is remains to be seen. But like there's been serious progress made at the quarterback position by the Broncos and everywhere else by the Chargers. So. It'll be a fun year for sure. That's going to do it for us. We again encourage you, hit that like button, the love button, send out the word to all your friends about the podcast, Red, Gold, and Bold. We do it right now during the offseason, every other Tuesday. Probably have some extra ones as we get a little bit closer to the draft. And of course, our Too Deep every other Thursday. So it'll be a week from Thursday when we're back at it at 9:00, 9 p Central Time on Thursdays is when we stream live. And of course, you can get the podcast wherever you get your podcast. So for Jeff Chadiha from the NFL Network and NFL.com, check out his great column there. Of course, you see him on the TV on NFL Network. Eric Eager, PFF.com. The PFF is where you will find all of his great work. My name is Soren Petro. You can catch me at 810WHB.com. Thanks for joining us here on Red, Gold, and Bold.